Hello everyone, it's Darren, and on today's episode we will be discussing what to do within your first 30 seconds of loading into battle. So when you load into battle, there is a ton of info that you need to process before coming up with a plan. The info you should be looking at starts before you even load into the match. Start by looking at the map on the loading screen. Where did you spawn? What game type is it? Your strategy starts with figuring out these two important pieces of information. Now once you've loaded in, the first thing you should do is figure out if you are top, mid, or bottom tier, because the way you play will depend on where you stand. The next thing you need to look at is your team and the enemy team's composition. This can be done by hitting the back button on your controller. You should be figuring out the answers to these questions. What tanks does your team have? Does your team have any platoons? What type of arty is on your team? Now what does the enemy team have? Are there any tanks extremely dangerous to you? Any platoons on their team? And what type of arty do they have? Now look at the map and look at the terrain. Are there any places on the map you can play to your tank's strengths? Lastly, as the game starts, watch what your team does and be prepared to adjust your strategy if it appears that your team is lemming training to one side, rushing the objective, or ignoring it entirely. Now let's look at some examples. Alright, let's look at my usual 30 seconds into battle. As you can see, the only information that I can really gather is that I am spawning in the southeast portion of the map. The map is swamp, and the game type is standard battle. Already I've come up with a plan, and that is to go to H7 and use my gun depression to fight on that ridgeline and get opposing shots on the enemy team. As I load in, I take in exactly where I spawned, and I look at the enemy team's composition. I notice that there is 2 platoons on the enemy team. There are only 2 tanks I need to look out for, the Waffenträger Panzerfahr and the Batchat. I also see that there are 2 platoons, including my platoon, on our team. The game starts and I immediately head to H7 to try and get some early spots, as well as some good shots on the enemy team, trying to peek out and do the same thing I'm going to do. My platoon mates are already have come to the conclusion that they are going to go to the castle at J3 and try and stop the enemy team from flanking us. The next example is a mid-tier game. At the time, however, I did not know whether or not I was going to be top tier or mid-tier, or whether I was defending or attacking. All I knew while loading in was that I was again spawning in the southeast portion of the map. The map was Ardennes, which was perfect for my Centurion 7-1, and that the game type was Assault. Upon loading in, I see where the enemy base is, and that I am attacking. Looking at the rosters, I notice that both teams have 2 platoons, and that the tanks I need to especially be careful of are the Rheinmetall Borsig Waffenträger, the Waffenträger Panzerfahr, the Batchat 25T, the TVP 5051, and the 13105. When the game starts, I decide to go right and head to the highest point on the map to use my excellent gun depression to support the assault. The area I was going to was A0. I do this because while I am capable of fighting against tier 10s, I have to remember that some of those tanks, if not most of them, could seriously damage me, taking off a good chunk of my hit points, or killing me outright if spotted and caught out alone. For our last example, we have a bottom tier match. Immediately we can see that the map and game type is the same as the first clip, but instead I spawned up north. We see that my team has 1 5-man platoon of all 10s, while the enemy team has less tier 10s, but with 2 3-man platoons. Right away I know I need to heavily play the supporting role because pretty much everything on the enemy team could kill me, and that their arty was in one of the platoons. Much like the first clip, I head to the ridge line at D5 to get some spots and cross shots on the enemy team attempting to do the same, but at the same time trying to use the strongest part of my tank's armor to its full potential. And that concludes our video on what to do in your first 30 seconds of battle. I'd like to thank you all for watching. If you liked the video, hit that thumbs up, and if you want to see more videos, don't forget to click the subscribe button. But until next time, this has been Darren with WotC Academy.